Good morning.
Morning.
Well, this is weird. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Sound check real quick. It's okay? So, this is the first time for us here at Buddha Eye. We've been doing this hybrid format for a long time now through COVID, but this remote Dharma talk, pretty interesting. And actually, I want to talk a tiny bit about that because what I want to talk about today is tenderness, a specific kind of tenderness that I think is at the heart of everything. You know, the world right now so deeply needs bodhisattvas, right? We need all of us who have a heart for something to really be able to show up. And this tenderness is at the dead center, or maybe I should say at the living quick of that showing up. So first of all, this digital thing. Now I invite you to put your video on if that's at all comfortable. I don't care about bedhead. I've got bedhead. So if it's at all comfortable for you at home to put your video on, I invite you to do that. I'm looking at a gallery picture, and so there's more names than anything. We're all in this weird, what was that game show? Hollywood Squares. This is how we're arriving for each other. Some of you may know me from my life at the university. I was a professor for a long time, and I was very animated about this transformation of the human heart and mind happening through digital culture. I thought it was very, very dangerous. I mean, granted, I'm addicted to my devices, but precisely that addiction and the impact it's had on me and as I saw in my students and my colleagues and on the world, made me really spend probably about the last decade of my time at the university trying to think about, how to solve digital culture with its sort of upload culture, one-click culture, avatar culture, all these different sides of digital culture, which encourage us to pretend as if those three marks of existence, impermanence, what the Buddhas call impermanence, right? Anicca, the non-enduring nature of the self, no self, anatta, and then suffering, dukkha. Those three marks of existence, digital culture has so many ways to encourage us to ignore them, right? Like, you can upload anything, so you're never going to lose anything. You don't need to worry about what happens to your LP collection because all of your music now is something you just subscribe to, right? Is this a familiar thing? This way in which digital culture encourages us to pretend as if impermanence, suffering, no self, that these things aren't real, right? So I was dead set against it. But then COVID came along, and I'm changing my tune because in COVID time, what digital culture gives us is this enduring reminder of just how fragile we are. I'm not coming to Buddha Eye these days because my husband's in a high risk category and I work in a hospital. And so it's too risky. Some of you who are online at home may also feel it's too risky. And so you show up in this Zoom land. Those of you in the hall, you're also weighing the risks. You're aware what it means to come, to put on your face mask, to come to be with others, to sit your 6 feet apart, right? This place that we're in now where we're so super mediated is a place where we are ironically reminded of just how interconnected we are. That if we were all in the same place, cheek to cheek, it'd be lovely. But we'd be spreading pathogens, potentially, right? So suddenly what COVID and the digital world that so many of us spend so much of our life in right now, what COVID is reminding us is that our interconnection is actually our vulnerability, right? Coming together reminds us just how fragile we are. And paradoxically, being apart also reminds us how connected we are and how fragile we are. Does this make sense? I'm going to take a sip of water, which may be really noisy. I'm sorry. Did that blow out anyone's eardrums? You okay? See, simple things like me sipping water suddenly become something that connects me to you in a whole new way, even though I feel so weird talking to little squares, right? But this tenderness, you know, and one part of this tenderness is that at any point my internet might drop. Joichi has promised to tell me if something weird happens on the tech side, on the other side. Any of you should jump in if suddenly something weird happens and you can't hear me anymore, just jump in. That's part of the tenderness I'm talking about. But the tenderness that I really want to underscore today is exactly the way in which being interconnected, being a part of a whole, right, is also completely inextricably bound to our deepest fragility. So, tenderness. What I really want to highlight today is perhaps best sort of set off by a couple of images from the 8th century scholar, monk, philosopher Shantideva's classic work, The Way of the Bodhisattva, or The Guide to the Bodhisattva's Life. Now, there's a bunch of legends about Shantideva. We don't know a lot about him. He was a monk, he was a scholar, he was at the greatest university in India at the time, Nalanda. We don't know a lot about him, but there's some legends that he was, although brilliant and a follower of Nagarjuna's teachings, he wasn't very well liked. In fact, his fellow monk scholars apparently were just ticked off with him. He was the sort of person who never came to assembly, never came to class, never came to lecture, right? One of the things that was said about him, at least in the legend, is his three great realizations were eating, sleeping, and pooping, right? This is, only when I read that in Pema Chodron, and the word she uses for pooping is not pooping. It's shitting, right? Eating, sleeping, and shitting. Those were his three great realizations. So the other scholar monks want to teach him a lesson, and they invite him to give a talk before the whole university. It's to humiliate him, right? And the legend has it that he ascends to the dais, and then he delivers without any notes, beautifully, this 10-chapter verse treatise that is what we now call The Way of the Bodhisattva. And he has them with the first stanza, basically, and they're just a rapt audience. And as he speaks, he starts to his thoughts, his voice becomes more and more sublime. So the legend has it that this monk with three great realizations, right? Nonetheless, as he speaks, he starts to rise up into the air and disappear into the heavens. So he's just a disembodied voice. Okay, that's the legend of Shantideva. And really, actually, some of the tenderness that I have been talking about is carried in that image of him as both someone whose three great realizations are eating, sleeping, and pooping, and someone who's so sublime that he's not even here in the flesh. Both things. So in The Way of the Bodhisattva, these two images, which I think just hold the perfect metaphors for the tenderness I want to talk about. And I'm going to read these. There are a lot of different translations of Shantideva. I'm going to be teaching Shantideva. Some of this is a teaser for the class that some of you might want to take with me in a couple weeks on The Way of the Bodhisattva and Bodhisattva practice. There are a bunch of different translations. There are free translations online, a lot of different things. Pema Chodron's version of Batchelor's translation that she uses in her book, No Time to Lose, I think is in many ways the best. So I want to quote these two images. This is from chapter 5 of Shantideva's Way of the Bodhisattva, and that's chapter where really dives into the Buddhist concept of Sila, a word that we, in our lineage, we tend to translate Sila as ethics or morality, but perhaps a better translation for the word Sila is discipline. And discipline in the sense of restraint, like the kind of discipline that you use when you don't eat the last chocolate brownie, okay? Sila is not eating the last chocolate brownie, okay? So in his chapter where he's starting to really dive into what Sila is, he says, to cover all the earth with sheets of hide, right, with leather, to cover all the earth with sheets of hide, where could such amounts of skin be found? But simply wrap some leather round your feet, and it's as if the whole earth had been covered. Okay. He's talking about, you know, our efforts to protect ourselves. You know, we want to control the external world, but he's saying, you know, don't try to control what's outside. Just put some shoes on, dude. But I who have very tender feet, like I can't walk barefoot very easily. Some of you may have heard Ajo a bazillion times talk about walking barefoot. Does that ring? Anyone remember hearing Ajo talk, right? Okay, just soften into the ground and you can do it. It's like, no, I can't. It hurts, right? This tenderness of our feet. So powerful. Think how central being a biped is to our human identity, right? And how much that biped upright nature relies on us actually being able to walk on our feet. And yet they're so tender. How do we do it? So that's one image of tenderness. The other image comes just a few stanzas later. And here too, he's talking about what it means to take care of our achy breaky human heart. He says, when in wild, unruly crowds, we move with care to shield our broken limbs. Likewise, when we live in evil company, our wounded minds, we should not fail to guard. For if I carefully protect my wounds because I fear the hurt of cuts and bruises, why should I not guard my wounded mind for fear of being crushed beneath the cliffs of hell? Okay, he's talking about discipline. I'm going to say a lot more about discipline in a little bit. He's talking about discipline. He's talking about the wounds he's talking about are the ways we're subject so quickly to the defilements of greed, hatred, and delusion. And he says, you know, if you would take a broken limb into a crowd and protect it, are you not going to protect your wounded mind, your vulnerable human mind? To me, it's like the feet, right? That there's this invocation of just how fragile and delicate we are, and what does it mean to protect that wounded arm? Okay, we're going to come back to Shanideva in a bit. So tenderness. He's talking about, I guess we're going to come back to Shantideva right now as I look at my notes. Always a good thing to do. He's talking about bodhicitta, right? He's talking about that side of us, that awakened side of us that feels the call to something bigger, that feels a sense of the whole, W-H-O-L-E, that awakened mind, that mind of awakening, right? Now, when I think about tenderness, vulnerability, and our capacity to tune into a sense of the whole, I always think about babies, okay? I think about, I don't remember this personally. If you do, you're an amazing human and I want to talk to you at great length. I don't remember personally what it was like to be in the womb, but it must have been pretty cool, right? 9 months or so, you know, hanging out in a place that was completely complete, right? No edge to the self, no boundary to the other, where every need is instantly met, where the difference between what is wholesome that the little growing body needs and what is noxious, what is not wholesome, what needs to be excreted, where that there's no even awareness of that bringing in and pushing away. It just happens in this whole warm, safe place that is the entire universe. And then, dang it, we're born, right? We come forward into the world. And the sense of a self is born at the same time that we lose our sense of the whole, right? whole with a W. Because of course, this incredibly central thing about us humans, our belly buttons, literally central thing, that's the HOLE that we all have in our bodies, no matter how we were born, whether cesarean or vaginal or whatever, right? That navel, that whole HOLE, keeps reminding us of that time already lost when we were completely complete, when we were whole with a W, right? And that wordplay in English is so important. That wordplay in English that makes us hear the link between HOLE and WHOLE, between the whole that we only now remember in that hole at the center of our bodies. Let me bring in another word, another little piece of wordplay. Holy, HOLY. So my thesis, put her on the internet and she starts expounding theses. My thesis is that, you know, at the heart of every religion, big or small, is this effort to kind of, for humans to kind of trace out the circuit between HOLE, WHOLE, and HOLY, from whole to holy, right? Religions help us reconnect to the whole shebang through things like notions of what is holy. Now, as I dive into this kind of comparative framework, which is this is like where my brain lives. I was a comparative, you know, literature person, and I'm an interfaith chaplain. But I'm kind of reminded, especially because I'm going to say some not so nice things maybe about some central religious concepts. I'm kind of reminded of that Seinfeld episode. It's the one that introduced the phrase yada, yada, yada. It's the episode, this really maybe dates me, but it's the episode where Jerry's dentist converts to Judaism, right? Do you guys, folks, remember this? Jerry's dentist converts to Judaism, and Jerry's so angry. He's like, he did it just so he could tell Jewish jokes. He did it for the jokes. I'm an equal opportunity spiritual seeker. You know, I grew up Jewish. As a teen, I was born again. In early adulthood, I wanted to become a Catholic. I'm now a lay ordained Zen Buddhist Dharma teacher. Like, I swear I didn't embrace so many religious traditions in order to tell jokes about them all, but I feel a little empowered perhaps, or emboldened is perhaps the better word, to talk a little bit about this comparative religious framework, because it helps me, I think, get at some of the trickiness about tenderness. So if you saw the digest and you saw my blurb, I'm calling this talk 4 Terrible Ideas. So I want to talk really quickly about 3 terrible ideas, 3 of the 4. And when I say terrible idea, I really want us to hear the way in which, you know, the kind of etymology of terrible, like, you know, these are ideas that should inspire fear and trembling, because they are big freaking ideas, transformative ideas, ideas that have completely changed the course of human history as they have evolved. And they're also terrible. Like all amazing human ideas, they bring forward such medicine, and they have such poison. Like all really, really, really good human ideas, these ideas are terrible. Okay, so the first idea, and all of these ideas are really ways of dealing with the tenderness I've been talking about, with that way in which we have a sense of wholeness because we're so freaking aware of the whole, the fracture, the fragmentation, the partialness, the brokenness at the core of our humanity. All of these terrible ideas are trying to grapple with that thing about us humans, our tenderness, our vulnerability, our reaching for a wholeness that we know has to be true, and yet, owie, where is it? These are all ideas that have come forward in the history of human religions, at least as I've studied them and encountered them and, you know, imbibed them in my life, to help people answer the question, okay, I have a hole at my being center. I feel, intuit wholeness somewhere. How do I get there? What do I do? What do I do? So the first of these terrible ideas comes from the Jewish tradition, and it's the concept of commandment, of mitzvah. Okay? It's like, I feel disconnected from the whole shebang. I feel disconnected from God, from truth with a capital T. But here are commandments that God has given to create. He wants to go steady with me, as it were, right? To have a connection with me, a covenant with me. If I can cleave, if I can attach to these commandments, if I can keep faith with God, he keeps faith with me. I can do something. I can regain connection to the whole, WHOLE. I can resolve the whole, fill the whole, HOLE, right? Now, amazing, right? A possibility that each moment of my life I could do something to be connected to the divine. I can follow the commandments. At the age of 13, like some of us here, I was bat mitzvah. That phrase, bat mitzvah, bar mitzvah, means becoming a daughter or son of the commandment, of the commandments, right? But the thing about our relationship to the mitzvot, to the commandments, if you're a Jew, is it gives you a people that have a special relationship. So there's an outside, there's an inside, and there's always the possibility that you are going to screw up and be on the outside. Connection, poison, all in one idea. Now, this is my like whirlwind, really probably quite irresponsible, but very heartfelt tour through major religions. One way to understand the next terrible idea, the Christian concept of sin, which arises out of Judaism, is to say sin comes up as a solution to that feeling of, oh, I might get cast out. It's like, well, yeah, you can do bad things. That whole HOLE in you, there's a word for that. That word is sin. And guess what? You can be healed. I remember as a 19-year-old wanting to become a Catholic so I could take Holy Communion and listening to the liturgy and thinking, oh, you know, if only I believe, Lamb of God, take away the sins of this world, take away my sins so that I can partake of communion with you. Oh. Sin is a great concept. It allows us to have a name for every way in which we feel separate from the whole. But my gosh, I mean, this is probably, you know, sort of part and parcel of our awareness living in a Judeo-Christian world. The word sin also has a really long shadow, right? How many of us perhaps suffering throughout our lives with a notion of being sinful? It's certainly something I come across in the hospital all the time as people equate their suffering with the sins that they have not been reconciled, forgiven, absolved of. Seeing that part of them that is just foul, defiled. And yet, the concept offers a possible bridge, right? And then we come to the 20th century. The last of my three, before I get back to Sila, terrible ideas. The idea that's really at the core of self-help and the emergence of the New Age, and goes back to the 40s and the early 50s, and Norman Vincent Peale, the concept of positive thinking. Positive thinking, right? This idea, I mean, this is at the heart of oh, and I forgot when I was doing my life history, I've studied tarot for a really long time, and I may have taken a class or two at the Berkeley Psychic Institute. So I have a pretty strong New Age bent, okay, along with my Jewish, Christian, Catholic, Buddhist thing. That sort of idea that comes through. Norman Vincent Peale, he was a Dutch Reformed minister. He was coming straight out of a really traditional line of Protestant Christianity, but he was speaking to the ways in which sin leaves people feeling broken and helpless, leaves them unable to answer the question, well, what do I do? And he said, you know, through Christ, all things are possible. Just focus on the positive. Build your strength. Faith is something you can practice. Wow. The notion of affirmation, of elevating the dignity of this human package, right? It's beautiful. And which of our presidents' families were members of Norman Vincent Peale's church? Does anyone know? He doesn't live in the White House anymore. So the shadow of positive thinking is a kind of narcissistic insistence on the perfection of self. Does this make sense? That affirmation, I've got it, we're good, it's fabulous, I'm fabulous, 2 thumbs way up for me, right? That's the pretty dark shadow of this beautiful, terrible idea that the self is worthy of radiant, positive regard. Okay. How do we get back to tenderness? Well, the tenderness is built into these terrible ideas, right? These ideas are ideas that emerge as humans have tried to grapple with our tenderness. In Buddhism, it takes the form, one place we see this, Ejo brought this up, I think in his first talk on the Bodhisattva Vow. It comes up in the terms of Subhuti's question to the Buddha in the Diamond Sutra, where he asks, he says, if a noble son or daughter should set forth on the Bodhisattva path, how should they stand, how should they walk, and how should they control their thoughts? He's asking the Buddha, what do I do? I see awakening. How do I embody it? And the Buddha kind of rightly, powerfully, importantly, throws Subhuti back on the ways in which awakening and the Bodhisattva path cannot be grasped. And he says, basically, give rise to the vow of awakening. Give rise to the vow. So the idea of Sila emerges in the context of that vow. Does this make sense so far as I talk? You sort of with me? Yeah. Sila, this notion of discipline, restraint. You know, Ejo, when he was talking about the Bodhisattva vow last week, was talking about its ungraspability in time. You know, beings are numberless. I vow to free them. That's like huge. That's forever, right? But Ejo brought forward this idea of stick-to-itiveness, of what it means to stick to the vow. Well, that's Sila. That's the power of discipline, of saying, I've felt this, I have a sense of awakening. I felt the inspiration. I felt connected to a whole. That's WHOLE, that's bigger than me. And how do I'm just going to hold on to that thought of awakening. That is my vow. I'm going to keep coming back to it, keep coming back to it, keep coming back to it. I'm going to stick with it. This is the Sila that is discipline, of coming back. Actually, Shantideva describes it in great detail, and he talks about it in terms of a vigilance, right? Of what it means moment by moment to watch as the kind of little seeds of greed, hate, and delusion take root in our lives, to watch ourselves, to stop. You know, the minute a klesha, a defiled emotion like anger just starts to spark before the words come out, stop, right? Just hit the brake. Don't say it. Pretty simple. That's Sila. Brilliant idea. We can bring attention moment by moment to the ways in which we pull away from the WHLE, the ways in which we separate ourselves out, the ways in which we push the world away, the ways in which we grab the world. We can bring attention, mindfulness, right? and a whole host of other strategies, all of which are about hitting the brakes. Powerful idea. What do? Cleave to your vow. Be vigilant. But am I the only one here who has felt that this vigilance, which makes such beautiful sense, is painful? That there's a side to restraint that is like bad Myobun. Don't do that. Don't do that. So Shantideva describes this observant, vigilant part of our mind that we train, right? He describes it. And I read that description and I think, well, okay, so there's a part of me that watches the other part of me and holds it off. The metaphor he uses is, the mind is like a wild elephant. And that may sound goofy to us because we think of elephants as cute and Barnum and Bailey, but think about elephants as really big, really dangerous animals. That's our mind. We're like capable of wreaking such havoc. And I've wreaked havoc with the best of them myself personally. So I know what he's talking about. And yet, where do I throw or push down that bad Myobun? Where does she go? Does this question resonate for folks? Have any of you tried to get up at 5 in the morning or 4 in the morning to sit zazen because you're trying to keep your practice commitments? And you're like, why am I doing this to okay, I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to do it. Head down, move forward, do. And yet, right? The cost of that. This is a terrible idea, guys. Discipline is a terrible, terrible idea. Terrible. And yet, right? There's got to be an and yet. I mean, I'm sitting here cross-legged on my cushion with the Buddha behind me. There's an and yet, right? So one of the reasons I have spent so much time, as some of you know, teaching mindfulness in formats like mindfulness-based stress reduction to non-Buddhists is because the contemporary mindfulness movement brings that notion of, well, pay attention, notice what's going on, see what's arising, brings up that side of discipline, but in the context of deep, deep, deep self-compassion, right? So when I'm teaching mindfulness-based stress reduction, I'm always saying to my students, just notice what's going on. If resistance arises, just notice it. You don't have to resist the resistance, just notice it. Deep self-care, everyone, notice what's coming up. And so then about like week 3 of the class, I start getting the emails saying, teacher, I really appreciate what you said about self-compassion. I don't feel like coming to class this week. I'll see you next week. Or week 4. Right? Week 4, which is halfway through the MBSR program, I get these emails saying, oh, thank you so much. I've learned so much. I feel like I've really gotten this whole mindfulness thing and, I don't need to take the class anymore. And I'm like, God damn it, where is your discipline? Right? So one of my struggles, one of my koans, we might say, right, is self-compassion, discipline. Like, how does that work? How do we create the place that holds the wholeness of this being and yet holds the tender feet of this tender being to the fire somehow? How do we do that? Okay, so I'm not going to give you a clear answer to that today. Sorry. I will be exploring that in the practice group starting a week after this Wednesday. But I do want to point toward what I think is a path toward a satisfying answer. So here's the thing, all the big world religions that I've ever lived in the heart of, thought about, read about, they all identify holiness or truth as things like gems and jewels. So for those of you familiar with the New Testament, the sort of concept of the pearl of great price, that the kingdom of God is like a pearl of great price that a merchant would throw everything away, sell everything to get. So it's this vision of this wholeness that's out there that we can like get rid of stuff and hold on to. And it's this indestructible, complete, totally gorgeous. I'm just making gestures. It's like its own thing, right? and nothing's going to break it. Nothing's going to damage it. And it's also not me, but I can gain access to it. So that image of the jewel also comes up in Shantideva. But in Shantideva, it takes a slightly different form. He's talking about bodhicitta. And this is, I think, what makes Shantideva such an important teacher for our time. He says, I have it in my notes. There we go. He says, should bodhicitta come to birth in one who suffers in the dungeons of samsara, which is all of us, by the way, we're all suffering in the dungeons of samsara. But if bodhicitta comes to birth in one who suffers in the dungeons of samsara, in that instant, he is called the Buddha's heir, worshipful alike to gods and men. For life, the supreme substance of the alchemists, bodhicitta, takes the impure form of human flesh and makes of it the priceless body of a Buddha. Such is bodhicitta. We should grasp it firmly. This alchemy he describes, that bodhicitta takes the form of our human flesh. That's the jewel. It's not separate from us. It's not even in us. It is us. It's us and our holiness, and our HOLINESS. It's wholly us. The tenderness that we experience is not the struggle to embrace bodhicitta. It is bodhicitta. Bodhicitta is fragile because it's human. It's precious because it's human, and because it is the heir of all the Buddhas. So grasp it firmly, which only means live your life fully. I think we have time for a question or two or comment. So that just means sort of unmuting yourself. And if you're in the hall at Buddha Eye, I'm not sure how you ask a question exactly. Maybe you just speak up. Or if you're at home, I think you just unmute yourself at will.
Hey, Joe.
Myobun?
Myobun?
Yes. I'm Tenkan, it's me. I'm the one who's speaking. Ajo's not here.
I know, I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. He's a good person to be confused for.
I was thinking about religion. I've thought about this for a long time, that if you look it up in the OED, religion always brings in a god. And it comes from the Latin root of it, to tie back to your roots, and the Buddha, it seemed to me, was breaking all the roots, breaking all the ties. And it would seem to me that Buddhism is more of a psychology than it is a religion in the classic sense. What do you think of that?
I disagree. I think if we define religion as related to God, and then we think about God as a Judeo-Christian God, then we're going to have way fewer expressions of humans seeking wholeness than actually exist in human culture. So to me, the ligament of religio is ultimately our umbilical cord. We all actually have a very embodied understanding of wholeness and interconnection, which to become born creatures is severed. There's this kind of and this is psychology, but this is also spirituality, both, I think. There's this very real experience, totally real, totally physical, of the whole at the center of our being, which nonetheless harkens us back. So I think we're all trying to get back. And for some of us, that takes the form of a relationship to a creator God. For others, there may be a pantheon of gods. For others, there may be something that's not even God. I don't know.
What about
You know, I'm a
interdependence?
comparatist. So when I, what?
What about interdependence of no
Interdependence?
self?
Yeah, that's what it's all about, in my view. You know, and when I squint enough, I mean, this is the comparatist in me. When I squint enough, it all looks the same. So you got a little taste of that today. But the same that it all looks is we all want connection. We all feel separate. I encounter this every day in everyone I meet. That doesn't mean that everybody wants connection all the time, but we're all longing for something. And yet we're all kind of, So what do we do with that? That's what I think ideas like Sila and world systems like Buddhism have arisen to address.
Myobun.
Jacob.
You talked about the idea of discipline and how it kind of sits alongside self-compassion. I think just taking the example of anger, for example, in my own experience, the way that I make of that is it is simultaneously, the discipline is both poison and antidote, and I think that kind of ties back into what you've been talking about. When you hold your anger, when you restrain it, I don't see it as like pushing it down, pushing it somewhere away or somewhere deep inside myself. I see it more as like refusing to step into the fire and let it burn yourself and others, and instead standing beside it and seeing it. It's hot, it's painful, it's not fun, it's not pleasant, but at the same time, it is the only antidote to that part of our being that is always there, and the only antidote to that suffering that has just been given rise to, that anger is displaying. I mean, there are times where I feel like it is valuable or even helpful to express that pain, that fire, that anger. But I think a lot of the time, when it comes out explosively and we let it, fire can be warm as much as it can burn down an entire village. Like, I don't. It's more of a comment, but it's just
Beautiful. That's beautiful, Jacob. I would only kind of, for me, I would kind of take it in this direction, which is to say, it may not be about stepping to the side of our anger so that we don't, leap into it and burn ourselves in the world. When we're angry, we are anger beings. And pushing that out into the world saves us the pain of actually being right at the center of that heat and learning what it is. The medicine comes when we're able to actually be with this being in all of her kleshas and defilements, to be right here. Shantideva is great on anger, by the way. So just another plug for Shantideva if you haven't read him yet. Okay. All right. Lovely to see you all today, and thanks for bearing with the weirdness of our COVID Zoom Buddha Eye Temple land. It's good to be with you today.